15. Look, they're setting up a dining place for me. It was midday. Kira pointed down to the area below the window, a small piece of land between the edifice and the edge of the woods. Thomas came to the window and looked. Workers had raised the structure that Kira could see was to be a shed. Under its roof, long poles from which to hang the wet yarns and threads to dry were already in place. It's better than anything she ever had, Kira murmured, remembering Annabella wistfully. I'm going to miss her, she added. It had all happened so quickly, Annabella's death so sudden, and now, only a day later, the new dining place was being made. What's that? Thomas pointed. To the side, the workers were digging a shallow pit. A support for hanging kettles was being pounded into place at the side. It'll be for fire. You need a very hot fire always, for the boiling of the dyes. Oh, Thomas, Kira sighed, turning away from the window. I'll never remember how to do it all. Yes, you will. I have it all written down, everything you told me. We'll just repeat it and repeat it. Look, what's that they're bringing? She looked again and saw them stacking bundles of dried plants beside the new shed. They must have brought all the ones Annabella had hanging from the beams in her cot, so at least I'll have a place to start. I think I know the names, if they haven't mixed them all together out of ignorance. Then she chuckled, watching one of the workers set down a covered pot and turn his face away with a grimace of disgust. It's the mordant, Kira explained. It smells terrible. She didn't want to say the rude word to Thomas, but it was what Annabella had called her peace pot, and its contents were a surprisingly vital ingredient in the making of the dyes. The workers had begun to arrive early that morning, bearing the kettles and plants and equipment, while Jamieson was still in Kira's room describing the events of the day before. A sudden death, he had explained, the way death often came to those of great age. She slept, Annabella had, napping on the rainy day, and didn't wake. That was all, no mystery to it. Perhaps she felt that she had completed her job by teaching Kira, Jamieson pointed out solemnly. Sometimes, he told her, it was the way death came, a drifting away when one's tasks were accomplished. And there's no need to burn her cot, he added, because there was no illness. So it will stay as it is. Someday you can live there, if you like, after you've finished your work here. Kira nodded, accepting his words. The old woman's spirit, she realized, would still be in her body. She'll need a watcher, Kira pointed out to Jamieson. Could I go and sit with her? I did for my mother. But Jamieson said no. Time was short. The gathering was coming. 4 days could not be lost. Kira must work on the rope. Others would do the watching for the old dyer. So Kira would mourn all alone. After Jamieson had gone, she sat silently, remembering how solitary Annabella's chosen life had been, how unconnected to the village. Only then did it occur to Kira to wonder. Who found her? How did they know to look? Thomas, come away from the window now. I need to tell you about something. Reluctantly, he came to where she was sitting at the table, though she could see from his face that he was still listening to the noise of the construction below. Boys, Kira thought. They were always interested in such things. If Matt were around, he'd be down there underfoot, getting in the way, wanting to help with the building. This morning, she began, then sensing his inattention. Thomas, listen. He grinned, turned toward her, and listened. I went to the room below, the one where we heard the tyke crying. And singing, Thomas reminded her. Yes, and singing. Her name is Jo, according to Matt, Thomas said. See, I'm paying attention. Why did you go down there? I was looking for Jamieson at first, Kira explained, and I found myself on that floor. So I went to the door, thinking I might peek in and see if the tyke was all right. But it was locked. Thomas nodded. He looked unsurprised. But they've never locked my door, Thomas, she said. No, because you were already grown, already 2 syllables when you came here. But I was young. I was still Tom when I arrived, he said. They locked my door. You were held captive? He frowned, remembering. Not really. It was to keep me safe, I think, and to make me pay attention. I was young and I didn't want to work all the time, he grinned. I was a little like Matt, I think, playful. Were they harsh with you? Kira asked, remembering the sound of Jamison's voice speaking to the little girl. He thought. Stern, he said finally. But, Thomas, the tyke below. Joe? She was crying, sobbing. She wanted her mom, she said. Matt told us her mom died. She doesn't seem to know that. Thomas tried to recall his own circumstances. I think they told me about my parents, but maybe not right away. It was a long time ago. I remember someone brought me here and showed me where everything was and how it worked. The bathroom and the hot water, Kira said with a wiry smile. Yes, that, and all the tools. I was already a carver. I'd been carving for a long time. The way I'd already been doing the threadings, and the way the tyke, Joe. Yes, Thomas said. Matt said she was already a singer. Kira, thinking, smoothed the folds of her skirt. So each of us, she said slowly, was already, I don't know what to call it. Artist? Thomas suggested. That's a word. I've never heard anyone say it. But I've read it in some of the books. It means, well, someone who is able to make something beautiful. Would that be the word? Yes, I guess it would. The tyke makes her singing, and it is beautiful. When she isn't crying, Thomas pointed out. So we are each artist, and we were each orphaned, and they brought us each here. I wonder why. Also, Thomas, there's something else, something strange. He was listening. This morning, I talked to Marlena, a woman I know from the weaving shed. She lives in the fen, and she remembered Joe, though she didn't know her name. She remembered the singing tyke. Everyone in the fen would know of such a tyke. Kira nodded, agreeing. She said, how did she put it? She tried to remember Marlena's description. She said that the tyke seemed to have knowledges. Knowledges? That was the word she used. What did she mean? She said that the tyke seemed to have knowledge of things that hadn't happened yet, that the people in the fen thought it was magic. She sounded a little frightened when she talked of it. And Thomas? What? He asked. Kira hesitated. It made me think of what happens sometimes with my cloth. The small one. Kira opened the box he had made for her and held out the fabric scrap, reminding him. I told you how it seems to speak to me. And I remember that you told me that you have a piece of wood that seemed to do the same. Yes, from when I was just a tyke, just beginning to carve, the one on the shelf. I've shown it to you. Could it be the same thing? Kira asked cautiously. Could it be what Marlena called knowledges? Thomas looked at her, and at the cloth that lay motionless in her hand. He frowned. But why? He asked at last. Kira didn't know the answer. Maybe it is something that artists have, she said, liking the sound of the word she had just learned. A special kind of magic knowledge. Thomas nodded and shrugged. Well, it doesn't matter much, does it? We each have a good life now, better tools than we did before. Good food, work to do. But the tyke below, she sobs and sobs, and they won't let her out of the room. Kira remembered her promise. Thomas, I told her I'd come back and that I'd help her. He looked dubious. I don't think the guardians would like that. Kira again remembered the severity she had heard in Jamison's voice. She remembered the slamming of the door. No, I don't think they would, she agreed. But at night, I'll creep down then, when they think we're all asleep, except... Her face fell. Except what? It's locked. There's no way I can get in. Yes, you can, Thomas told her. How? I have a key, he said. It was true. Back in his room, he showed her. It was a long time ago, he explained. But here I was, locked in, with all these fine tools. So I carved the key. It really was quite easy. The lock on the door is a simple one. And, he added, fingering the intricately carved wooden key, it fits all the doors. All the locks are the same. I know because I tried them. I used to go out at night and roam the hallways, opening doors. All the rooms were empty then. Kira shook her head. You were really mischievous, weren't you? Thomas grinned. I told you, just like Matt. Tonight, Kira said, suddenly serious. Will you come with me? Thomas nodded. All right, he agreed. Tonight. 16. Evening came. Kira, in Thomas's room, looked down through the window at the squalor of the village and listened to its chaotic din as workers in the various sheds finished their last chores. Down the lane, she could see how the butcher threw a container of water over the stone doorstep of his hut, a useless gesture toward cleaning away the clotted filth. Nearer, she watched the women leaving the weaving shed where she had worked as helper for so much of her childhood. Kira wondered, smiling, whether Matt had been there during the workday that had just ended. Assigned to cleaning up chores, he had probably been underfoot with his mates, making trouble and stealing food from the women's lunches. From her place at the window, she couldn't see any sign of him or his dog. She hadn't seen them all day. She waited there with Thomas until long past dark, until the tenders had taken their food trays away. At last, the entire building was still, and the clamor from the village had subsided as well. Thomas, Kira suggested, take your little piece of wood, the special one. I have my scrap with me. All right, but why? I don't know exactly. I feel that we should. Thomas got the small carved piece from its high shelf and put it into his pocket. In his other pocket was the wooden key. Together, they went down the dimly lit corridors to the stairs. Ahead of her, Thomas whispered, Shh. I'm sorry, Kira whispered back. The stick makes a noise, but I can't walk without it. Here, wait. They stopped beside one of the wall torches. Thomas ripped a length of cloth from the hem of his loose shirt. Deftly, he tied it around the base of Kira's walking stick. The cloth muted the noise of the wooden stick on the tiled floor. The pair made their way quickly down the flight of stairs and to the door of the room where Josh slept. They paused there and listened, but there were no sounds. Kira's hand in her pocket felt no warning from her scrap of cloth. She nodded to Thomas, and silently he inserted the big key and turned it to open the door. Kira held her breath because she feared that a tender might be sharing the room to guard the tyke at night. But the room, illuminated only by pale moonlight through the window, held only one small bed and one small fast-asleep girl. I'll stay by the door to watch, Thomas murmured. She knows you, or your voice, at least. You wake her. Kira went to the bed and sat on its edge, propping her stick beside her. Gently, she touched the small shoulder. Joe, she said softly. The little head, long hair tangled, turned restlessly. After a moment, the tyke opened her eyes with a startled, frightened look. No, don't, she cried out, pushing Kira's hand away. Shh, Kira whispered. It's me, remember? We talked through the door. Don't be afraid. I want me mom, the tyke wailed. She was very small, much smaller than Matt, hardly more than a toddler. Kira remembered the power of the singing voice that she had heard, and marveled that it had come from its tiny, frightened waif of a thing. Kira picked her up, cradled her, and rocked her back and forth. Shh, she said. Shh, he's all right. I'm your friend. And see over there? His name is Thomas. He's your friend, too. Gradually, the tyke was soothed. Her eyes opened wide. Her thumb slid into her mouth, and she spoke around it. I'd be listening to you at the hall, she said, remembering. Yes, the keyhole. We whispered to each other. You know me, Mom? Can you bring her? Kira shook her head. No, I'm afraid I can't, but I'll be here. I live just upstairs, and Thomas does too. Thomas came nearer and knelt by the bed. The tyke stared at him suspiciously and clutched Kira. Thomas pointed to the ceiling. I live right above you, he said in a gentle voice, and I can hear you. You hear me singing? He smiled. Yes, Your singing is very beautiful. The tyke scowled. They always be making me learn new ones. New songs? Kira asked her. Joe nodded unhappily. Over and over, they be making me remember everything. Me old songs, they just be there natural. But now they be stuffing new things into me, and this poor head hurts horrid. The tiger rubbed her tangled hair and sighed, a strangely adult sound that made Kira smile sympathetically. Thomas was looking around the room, which held many of the same pieces of furniture as the rooms above: a bed, a tall wooden chest of drawers, a table, and 2 chairs. Joe, he said suddenly, are you a good climber? She frowned and removed her thumb from her mouth. I be climbing trees sometimes in the fan, but me Mom, she hits me when I do because she say I be breaking me legs and then they take me to the field. Thomas nodded solemnly. Yes, that's probably true, and your mother didn't want you to get hurt. Once draggers take you to the field, you don't never come back. Beasts take you. The thumb popped back in. But look, Joe, if you could climb up there, Thomas pointed to the top of the chest of drawers. The wide eyes followed his pointing finger, and then the tyke nodded. If you stood very tall up there, and if you had some tool, you could hit the ceiling, and I would hear you. The tyke grinned at the thought. You mustn't do it just for fun, Thomas added quickly. Only if you really needed us. Might I be trying it? Joe asked eagerly. Kira lifted her down to the floor. Like a limber animal, the tyke scrambled from chair to tabletop, and from the tabletop she climbed to the top of the chest. Then she stood triumphantly. From below, her woven nightdress emerged 2 bare thin legs. We need a tool, Thomas murmured, looking around. Remembering something from her own quarters, Kira went to the bathroom. As she had guessed, a thick hairbrush with a wooden handle lay on the shelf beside the sink. Try this, she said, and handed it up to the tyke. Smiling broadly, the little singer reached up and thumped the brush handle on the ceiling. Thomas lifted her down and put her back into the bed. That's it, then, he said. If you need us, that's the signal, Joe, but never just for fun, only if you need help. And we'll come to see you, too, even you don't thump, Kira added. After the tenders are gone, she tucked the bed covers around the tyke. Here, Thomas, put this back, would you? She handed him the hairbrush. We must go now, she told Joe. But do you feel better knowing that you have friends up there? The tyke nodded. Her moist thumb slid into her mouth. Kira smoothed the blanket. Good night, then. For a moment, she sat there on the bed, feeling a vague memory of something else that should be done, something from when she was a small tyke, like this, being put to bed. She leaned down toward the little girl intuitively. What was it that her mother had done when she was small? Kira put her lips on Joe's forehead. It was an unfamiliar gesture, but felt right. The little girl made a small contented sound with her own lips against Kira's face. A little kissy, she whispered, like me, Mom. Kira and Thomas parted in the upstairs corridors and made their way separately back to their own rooms. It was late, and as always, they were expected to work in the morning and needed sleep. As Kira prepared for bed, she thought about the frightened, lonely tyke below. What songs were they forcing her to learn? Why was she here at all? Ordinarily, an orphan tyke would be turned over to another family. It was the same question that she and Thomas had discussed the day before, and the answer seemed to be the conclusion they had reached. They were artists, the 3 of them, makers of songs, of wood and threaded patterns. Because they were artists, they had some value that she could not comprehend. Because of that value, the 3 of them were here, well-fed, well-housed, and nurtured. She brushed her hair and teeth and got into bed. The window was open to the breeze. Below, she could see the half-completed constructions that would soon be her dying garden, fire pit, and shed. Across the room, through the darkness, she could see the folded, covered shape on top of her work table, the singer's robe. Suddenly, Kira knew that although her door was unlocked, she was not really free. Her life was limited to these things and this work. She was losing the joy she had once felt when the bright-colored threads took shape in her hand, when the patterns came to her and were her own. The rope did not belong to her, though she was learning its story through her work. She would almost be able to tell the history now that it had passed through her fingers, now that she had focused on it so closely for so many days. But it was not what her hands or heart yearned to do. Thomas, uncomplaining though he was, had mentioned the headaches that afflicted him after hours of work. So had the little singer below. "Davy's stopping new things into me," the tyke had whimpered. She wanted the freedom to sing her own songs as she always had. Kira did too. She wanted her hands to be free of the ropes so they could make patterns of their own again. Suddenly, she wished that she could leave this place, despite its comfort, and return to the life she had known. She buried her face in the bedcloth and for the first time cried in despair. 17. "Thomas, I've worked hard all morning, and you have too. Would you take a walk with me? There's something I want to see." It was midday. They had both eaten lunch. "You want to go down and look at what the workmen are doing?" "I'll go with you." Thomas set aside the carving tool he had just picked up. Kira noticed again, with admiration, how intricate the work was on the large singer's staff. Thomas had been smoothing the tiny rough spots from the worn ancient carvings and reshaping the infinitesimally small edges and curves. It was very similar to the work that Kira herself had been assigned, the repair of the singer's robe, and the entire top of the staff was undecorated. It was smooth, uncarved wood, in the same way that the expanse across the shoulders of the robe was untouched cloth. Kira's work was approaching that unadorned expanse, so was Thomas's, she realized. "What will you carve there?" she asked him, pointing to the undecorated part. "I don't know. They said they'd tell me." She watched as he carefully laid the staff across the table. "Actually," she told them, "if you want to look at what the workmen are doing, I'll go there with you later. But that's not what I had in mind. Will you go with me first where I want?" Thomas nodded good-naturedly. "Where's that?" he asked. "The fan," Kira told him. He looked at her quizzically. "That filthy place? Why would you want to go there?" "I've never been there. I want to see where Joe lived, Thomas." "And Matt does still," she reminded her. "Yes, Matt too. I wonder where he is, Thomas." Kira was uneasy. "I haven't seen him in 2 days. Have you?" Thomas shook his head. "Maybe he found another source of food," he suggested, laughing. Matt could point out where Jo lived. "Maybe I could even bring something back for her." "Maybe she had toys. Did they let you bring things when you came here, Thomas?" He shook his head. "Just my bits of wood. They didn't want me distracted." Kira sighed. "She's so small. She should have a toy. Maybe you could carve her a doll, and I could stitch a little dress for it." "I could, I guess," Thomas agreed. He handed Kira her walking stick. "Let's go," he said. "We'll probably find Matt along the way, or he'll find us." Together, the pair made their way out of the edifice, across the plaza, and down the crowded lane. At the weaving shed, Kira paused, greeted the women, and asked about Matt. "Haven't seen him, and good riddance too," one of the workers replied. "The useless scamp." "When are you coming back, Kira?" another asked. "We could use your help, and you're old enough to be on the looms now. With your mother gone, you must need the work." But another woman laughed loudly and pointed to Kira's clean new cloth. "She don't need us no more." The looms began to click and move again. Kira turned away. Nearby, she heard an oddly familiar, oddly frightening sound, a low growl. Quickly, she glanced around, half expecting to see the menacing dog or something worse. But the sound had come from a cluster of women near the butcher's. They burst into laughter when they saw her looking. She saw Vendera in their midst. The scarred woman turned her back on Kira, and she heard the growl again, a human imitation of a beast. Kira lowered her head and limped past them, ignoring the cruel laughter. Thomas had gone ahead. She could see him far beyond the butcher's. He had stopped near a group of young boys playing in the mud. "Dunno," one was saying as she approached. "Give me coins and maybe I could find him." "I asked them about Matt," Thomas explained, "but they say they haven't seen him." "Do you suppose he might be sick?" Kira asked, worried. "His nose is always running." "Maybe we should never have cleaned him up. He was accustomed to that layer of dirt." The boys, slapping their bare feet in the mud, were listening. "Matt's the strongest of the strong," one said. "He'd never be sick." A smaller one wiped his own runny nose on the back of his hand. "His mom be yelling at him. I heard her, and she throwed a rock at him too, and he laughed at it and run off." "When?" Kira asked the runny-nosed boy. "Dunno," he said. "Maybe 2 days ago." "It were," chimed in another. 2 days ago. I seed it too. His mom chucked a rock at him 'cause he took on some food. He said he were going on a journey." "He's all right, Kira," Thomas reassured her, and they walked on. "He takes care of himself better than most adults. Here, I think this is where we turn." She followed him down an unfamiliar narrow lane. The huts were closer together here and close to the edges of the woods, so that they were shaded by trees and smelled of darkness and rot. They came to a foul-smelling stream and crossed it by a slippery, primitive bridge of logs. Thomas took her hand and helped her. It was treacherous with her bad leg, and she feared slipping into the water, which was quite shallow but clogged with filth. On the other side of the stream, beyond the thick poisonous oleander bushes that were such a danger to tykes, lay the area known as Fen. In some ways it was similar to the place that Kira had called home, the small cots, close together, the incessant wailing of infants, the stench of smoky fires, rotting food, and unwashed humans. But it was darker here, with the trees thick overhead and festering with dampness and an odor of ill health. "Why must there be such a horrible place?" Kira whispered to Thomas. "Why do people have to live like this?" "It's how it is," he replied, frowning. "It's always been." A sudden vision slid into Kira's mind. The robe. The robe told how it had always been, and what Thomas had said was not true. There had been times, oh, such long ago times, when people's lives had been golden and green. Why could there not be such times again? She began to say it to him. "Thomas," she suggested, "you and I, we're the ones who will fill in the blank places. Maybe we can make it different." But she saw how he was looking at her. His look was skeptical, amused. "What are you talking about?" He didn't understand. Perhaps he never would. "Nothing," Kira told him, shaking her head. As they walked, an ominous quiet fell. Kira became aware of eyes. Women stood in shadowed doorways, watching them suspiciously. Kira limped along, tried to find ways around the garbage-strewn puddles in the path, and felt the hostile stares. It made no sense, she knew, to walk without a destination through this unfamiliar, malevolent place. "Thomas," she murmured, "we must ask someone." He stopped, and she stopped beside him. They stood uncertainly in the path. "What be your purpose?" a hoarse voice called from an open window. Kira looked and saw a green lizard slither into the vines at the sill. Behind the fluttering wet leaves, a gaunt-faced woman was holding a tyke in her arms and looking out. There seemed no man around. She realized the men, mostly draggers and diggers, would all be working, and she felt relieved, remembering how they grabbed at her the day of the weapons. Kira made her way through the thorny underbrush and went closer to the window. Through it, she could see the dark interior of the cot, where several other tykes, half-naked, stood staring dull-eyed and frightened toward her. "I am looking for the boy called Matt," she said politely to the woman. "Do you know where he lives?" "What you be giving me for it?" "Giving you?" "I'm sorry," Kira told her, startled by the question. "I don't have anything to give." "Not food?" "No, I'm sorry." Kira held her hands out, showing that they were empty. "I have an apple." Thomas approached, and to Kira's surprise, took a dark red apple from his pocket. I saved it from lunch, he explained to Kira in a low voice, and he headed toward the woman. Her thin arm reached out from the open window and grabbed the fruit. She bit at it and began to turn away. "Wait," Kira said. "The cot where Matt lives. Can you tell us, please?" The woman turned back, her mouth full. "Further down," she said, chewing noisily. The infant in her arms grabbed at the bitten apple, and she shoved his hands away. She gestured with her head. "There be a busted tree in front." Kira nodded. "And please, one more thing," she pleaded. "What can you tell us about a tyke named Joe?" The woman's face changed, and Kira found it hard to interpret the look. For a moment, a brief flicker of joy had washed across the thin, embittered face. Then hopelessness replaced it. "The little singing girl," the woman said. Her voice was a hoarse whisper. "She be taken. They taken her away." She turned away abruptly and disappeared into the shadowed interior of the cot. Her children began to cry and to claw at her for food. The gnarled tree was dying, split almost to the ground and rotting. Perhaps it had once borne fruit, but now its limbs were broken, dangling at odd angles, punctuated by occasional wisps of brown leaves. The small cot behind the tree looked damaged and neglected too, but there were voices inside. A woman speaking roughly and a sharp-tongued child answering her in an angry, spiteful tone. Thomas knocked. The voices became quiet, and finally the door opened slightly. "Who you be?" the woman asked abruptly. "We're friends of Matt's," Thomas told her. "Is he inside? Is he all right?" "Who be it, Mom?" the child's voice called. The woman peered at Thomas and Kira silently, not answering. Finally, Thomas called to the child. "Is Matt at home?" "What's he done now?" "What should be wanting him for?" the woman asked, her eyes glinting with mistrust. "He run off and took him food too," a tyke called to them. His head, thick with tousled, unkempt hair, appeared beside the woman. He pushed the door open wider. Kira looked in dismay at the cot's dark interior. A pitcher, overturned on the table, lay in a puddle of some thick liquid through which insects crawled. The tyke at the door picked his nose with one finger, scratched himself with the other hand, and stared at them. His mother coughed wetly and then spat something to the floor. "Do you know where he went?" Kira asked, trying not to show how shocked he felt at the condition of these people. The woman shook her head and coughed again. "Good read to him," she said. She shoved the tyke to the side and pulled the heavy wooden door closed. After a moment, Kira and Thomas turned away. Behind them, they heard the door open. "Miss, I know where Matt goed," the tyke's voice said. He emerged from the cot despite his mother's scolding voice and came to them. He was clearly Matt's brother. He had the same bright, mischievous eyes. They waited. "What you give me?" His finger went into his nose again. Kira sighed. Life in the fen was apparently a series of barters. No wonder Matt had become such a clever manipulator and entrepreneur. She looked helplessly at Thomas. "We don't have anything to give you," she explained to the tyke. He eyed her appraisingly. "How about that there, miss?" he suggested, pointing to Kira's neck. She touched the thong from which hung the polished stone. "No," she told the tyke, and her fingers curled protectively around the stone. "This was my mother's. I can't give it to you." To her surprise, he nodded as if that made sense to him. "That there, then?" He pointed to her hair. Kira remembered that she had tied it back that morning, as she often did, with the simple leather cord of no value. Quickly, she pulled it loose and held it out. The tyke grabbed it and thrust it to his pocket. It seemed to be a satisfactory payment. Our mom, she thrashed Matt so hard he was horrid bloody, and so him and Branchy, they goed on a journey and they not be coming back, not to the fen, the tyke announced. Matt, he got friends who be taking good care of him, not thrashing him never, and they give him food too. Thomas laughed a little. "And they make him take bath," he added, though the tyke just stared, not understanding the word. "But he meant us," Kira pointed out. We're the friends he meant. She was concerned. If he tried to come to us, where is he? He was 2 days ago that he left here, and no one's seen him since. He knew the way to. Matt's brother interrupted her. Him and Branchy, they go someplace else first. He be getting a gifty for his friends. That be you, miss. And you? He looked at Thomas. They nodded. Matt, he said that a gifty makes a person like you best of all. Kira sighed in exasperation. No, that's not the way it is. A gift, she gave up. Never mind. Tell us where he went. He be getting you some blue. Blue? What do you mean? Dunno, miss. But Matt, he said it. He be saying they got blue yonder, and he be getting you some. The woman reappeared in the open doorway and called in a shrill and angry voice to the tyke, who retreated inside. Thomas and Kira turned away and began to retrace their steps on the muddy path back toward the village. Silent watchers still lurked in doorways. The fetid air still hung humid. Kira whispered to Thomas, When Matt disappeared, I thought perhaps we would find that he had been taken too, like Joe. If he'd been taken, Thomas suggested, we'd know his whereabouts. He'd be there with us in the council edifice. Kira nodded. And with Joe, although maybe they'd have locked him up like her. He'd hate that. Matt would find a way to get free, Thomas pointed out. Anyway, he added, helping Kira find her way around a puddle with the dead rat in it. They wouldn't want Matt, I'm afraid. They only want us for our skills, and he hasn't any. Kira thought of the impish boy, of his generosity and his laughter, of his devotion to the little dog. She thought of him now, wherever he was, on his quest to bring a gift to friends. Oh, Thomas, she said. He does. He knows just how to make us smile and laugh. There seemed no hint of laughter or any history of it in this terrible place. Making her way through the squalor, Kira remembered Matt's infectious chortle. She thought, too, of the clear purity of the small singer's voice, and how the two children must have been the only elements of joy here. Now Joe had been taken away, and Matt was gone as well. She wondered where he could have journeyed all alone but for the dog to search for the blue.